Longbox Review, Episode 16, Halcyon. Hi, this is Eric from Longbox Review at longboxreview.wordpress.com. Today, Travis and I are here to talk about the Image series Halcyon. That was Image. Okay, I panicked there for a second thinking it was somebody else that published it.
Nope, it's Image.
All right, let's see. Halcyon, written by Mark Guggenheim along with Tara Butters, his wife. Artist,
I didn't know.
Yeah. Artist is Ryan Bodenheim with colors by Mark Englert. And that's the creative team. Travis, did you know that the origin of this story comes directly from the movie Watchmen?
Really?
Yes. So apparently,
No.
apparently Mark and Tara went to see Watchmen, and afterwards they came out of the theater and they were talking about the movie. And basically, Tara Butters wanted to know what happened after the end of the movie. You know, she's a writer too, like Mark, and she wanted to, take the story to the next beat, which is okay. So they stopped Ozymandias's plan, so to speak. But then what happens next? And so that started Mark thinking about doing this story. Featuring these characters in Halcyon. Let's see here. I want to give a bit of background on these guys. Mark Guggenheim. You recognize his name, right, Travis? He's done a few things over the years.
Well, yeah.
Let's see. He's primarily known as a TV writer. He's written for The Practice, Law and Order, and he co-created one of my very favorite short-lived shows, Eli Stone. That was kind of cool. I actually didn't remember that. But he has a comic book writing pedigree. He's written for DC, Marvel. He's done his own creator-owned stuff besides Halcyon. Let's see. So he's worked on Aquaman, Wolverine, Blade, Flash. That's when Bart they aged Bart. And then shortly after the series started with Bart as Flash, they killed him off.
Nice.
And then and Resurrection is his creator-owned work, besides Halcyon. His wife Tara is also a TV writer / producer. She's worked on Law and Order SVU, Dollhouse, which I didn't really remember that either, and also created. Do you remember the show Reaper?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny how these people that who's worked on other things outside of comics that I've absolutely enjoyed. Here they are doing this book. Let's see. The artist Ryan Bodenheim has done pencils for Black Panther, a Red Mask for Mars, and worked on Fear Itself, Fearsome 4 more recently. And Mark Englert, I'm sure he's done a lot more work, but the only thing I could really find that he's worked on besides this book of Halcyon was Hackslash. So, but that was just me doing a quick Google search. I'm sure there are other credits out there. So I apologize to at least the color artist here for not having more of a detailed look at his work. Let's see. Halcyon was announced at the San Diego Comic-Con in 2010, but at that time it was known as Utopia.
Utopia, yeah.
And Travis, I know that there's a little bit of a story there with you. I remember you posting something about this. Do you remember what that was?
Actually, no, to tell you the truth, I don't exactly. Other than I know I ordered it as Utopia, and so I ended up not getting the first issue ordered to me because I still had it requested to get it under Utopia, and the people I was ordering it from didn't know there was a change in the title.
Yes, that's what I remember.
And so I had to go to the store and pick up the first couple issues. It was missed. Yeah, I'm not sure why that name changed to it. I don't know.
Yeah, I tried to find out why they did that. and I really just based on, like I said, I just did a real quick search on the internet about Halcyon and the people involved, and I could not, and specifically, I wanted to find out why they did that, why
Mhm.
they changed it from Utopia to Halcyon. I think we could guess, perhaps, why they wanted to make the change, um, but I couldn't find anything directly about that.
Yeah, the title Utopia is boring. Yeah,
And a little too on the nose, perhaps.
way, yeah.
So yeah, and Halcyon
Well,
has.
I mean, but it was billed as a what do superheroes do when there is no crime?
Hmm.
Of course, the book we got wasn't the book I expected it to be, but
Oh
that's
yeah.
okay.
So
Yeah.
so what did you expect the book to be?
Well, because we saw this stuff and the brief solicitations for it, and because it's not a one of the big two, so you don't get as many at least it seemed like we weren't getting as many blips about what it was going to really be about to give us more detail on it. Um, I wasn't sure what to make of it. I was just going to pick up the first couple issues because to me it is a curious question. What do superheroes do after there is no more there's no more crime. Um, but I almost wondered if it was going to be kind of a tongue in cheek kind of a book because I mean I don't know how seriously you could take that. How far can you go with that question? I don't know.
Hmm.
Um, so I was getting it on a lark because I like the question, and so I was going to at least get the first couple issues to see what it was going to say.
Hmm.
But what we got, I guess, wasn't what I expected. Like I said, I expected it to almost be some sort of a you know tongue in cheek kind of a thing,
Yeah.
and it wasn't that at all.
It's funny to hear you say that. Just so the listeners know, Travis and I haven't really talked about this off mic, so to speak. So this is just us now verbalizing our thoughts about the series to each other.
Uh,
But it's interesting, Travis, that you say it's not exactly what I expected, because that's exactly how I feel about this book. Although I did come at it from the viewpoint of, like you did, about this may be a tongue-in-cheek interpretation of this kind of a story.
uh-huh.
I took it at face value based on what I knew of it, and so again, what we got in the end, I'm not sure matched what I was thinking. So, but we'll get into that as we go along. But it's just interesting to hear you say that as well. So this might be a short episode. Who knows? Uh, so yeah, so Travis, you said you picked it up off the shelf. You got all 5 issues monthly, or
Yes, I
or
did.
or however they came out, because I don't think they
Right.
came out quite monthly, as I remember.
No, there was a gap between I think like 3 and 4 or something like that.
Oh yeah,
But yeah.
and I took notes on these things, and I actually did put that down, the cover dates on those, but I did not put down what the cover dates were for issues 4 and 5. Oops. Does it say on your copies? Do you have them handy?
Um. Yeah, I'm looking at them now, but it doesn't. Let's see.
See, folks, this is what happens when I don't do my homework.
November, December. Well, I didn't either. January for 3. Then it's March.
Uh,
The third issue is January, and then issue 4 is March 2011, and then May
okay.
2011.
I think I did. I think I did read that. That rings a bell, but for some reason I didn't write it down. Okay. Well, we'll get back to those in some time here. All right. Let's get into it, Travis. Let's see. Oh, first, actually, 2 more things I wanted to mention. If you want to do some more, I think some interesting reading. There was a very interesting interview between Rich Johnson of Bleeding Cool and Mark Guggenheim about the series. This was done almost exactly a year ago today, Travis. I was
Oh
looking
yeah.
at I was looking at it, yeah. And I'll provide the link in the show notes for the folks to take a look at that, because Rich Johnson does not pull any punches, man. Um, but I'll get into that towards the end of the episode. I want to touch on that just a little bit. But man, that was interesting reading, and Mr. Guggenheim's responses was equally interesting. So
I missed that somehow, so I'll look forward to the link too.
Well, like I said, I Googled Halcyon and Guggenheim just to see what came up, and that was one of the links that came up, and I read through that. I'm like, wow, I've never seen an interview quite like that between a comic blogger and a creator. Yeah. Well, anyway, I'll talk about that later. But so we'll get to that. Okay. So before we get into the actual issues, I wanted to take note of who exactly we're talking about. Let's see here. So the major cast of characters, there's a bunch of people in here, but these are the ones I felt needed to be recognized. So, in sort of order of appearance, we have Jarhead, who is basically a Captain America analog. Then we have Oculus, which is our villain of the story. He comes across as kind of a sort of Doctor Doom type. Doctor Doom / Lex Luthor, pretty much any arch villain that bases his shtick is kind of science based,
Right.
kind of all wrapped up into one. Then there's Saber, which is our Batman, Zenith, which is our Superman. Oh boy, here we go. My writing is not good. Agni, I believe, is right. The fire
Yep.
god, and the Guggenheim and Butters tells us who these characters are as they appear, and gives us kind of a brief, very brief description of them.
Yeah.
Like Zenith. Well, at times actually, I think they do a good job of giving us a really brief description of what they can do, like Agni, and that is correct, Agni, Indian god of fire and light. Okay, so that way we have an idea of kind of what the character is. We at least get a reference from where he is and what his powers are, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then for like Zenith, he does this, world's greatest hero, and that's it. Now, granted, it doesn't take a whole lot to see, based on the panels, the stuff that's going on in the story, that she is the Superman of the story. But
Right.
I just found it interesting that they chose to do that as opposed to somehow being more descriptive in what uh, Zenith could do. Then there's Enos, which is the enhanced chimpanzee. And Travis, I don't know about you, but I kind of equated Enos with kind of like Martian Manhunter in a way.
I suppose.
What else?
So,
Go ahead.
well, I guess I never really, I guess I didn't take the time to, you ponder what their niche was, and like in comparison to the Justice League or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's kind of the more of the brains of the bunch, I guess.
Well, and partly, and it's not so much, obviously there's really no connection between him being an enhanced chimpanzee and the Martian Manhunter, but he seems to be the one where communications kind of goes through. He's kind of like the hub of the group as
Right.
far as that. So that's kind of why I thought of
Yeah, you're right.
of John Jones. Let's see, who else? Triumph is, I guess she's kind of like, she's the strong female, so,
Well, this says superheroine.
yeah,
That's all it's ever heard.
exactly, superheroine,
Yeah.
and
Don't forget Null.
right. I was gonna say, so then we have Null, and then what? So yeah, what is? Do they ever describe Null, or is he just Null?
He's just Null,
Yeah,
and he doesn't talk. He
which
uses
is,
sign language.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. So Null, and then there's nothing about him. So I guess that makes sense. Although still, from a reader's perspective, I find that just slightly annoying. Um, then there's Transom, which is the super speedster, and finally
Yeah.
Cyclops, which is the telepath of the group. Like I said, there are other characters, but those are kind of the major ones throughout the story. Okay. So you didn't really put a whole lot of thought into how these characters are kind of like analogs of other characters we've seen.
I guess I didn't. Yeah, they fit the general tropes of of the superheroes. Just like you named off. Well, this guy's kind of the Captain American, but not really. But
Mm-hmm.
and Sable is, I guess, a much more violent version of Batman. So yeah, but I guess I didn't spend that much time. I guess I didn't spend that much time really, placing him in those things. Now, I'm just curious. When you read this, did you have the prior knowledge that this was based off of the Watchmen and what happened after the fact?
No, I did not.
Okay.
That's something I
Because I
learned
don't know,
during my
I might have
research.
read these differently. If I had known that that was the premise, I might have read this whole thing with a different tilt than what I did. Um, but I mean, yeah, I mean, yeah, like I said, I recognize that they fit the traditional niches of your general superhero group, that all of the kind of areas are covered. Your super speedster, you know your powerhouse, your you know kind of the brains of the group. That was all kind of represented there in your standard traditional superhero group.
Mm-hmm.
But in this first issue, I wasn't sure how many of these people were really going to be that relevant. It struck me that the people that were going to be important was going to be Sable and potentially Zenith, because they have more face time than anybody else does.
Right.
Well, that and Oculus, obviously, being the bad guy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So
Sure.
I just kind of took those other heroes as face value and went, okay, well, maybe I'll see them again, maybe I won't,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't really sweat them.
Yeah. Well, I think too the way that some of these characters are brought in and taken out of the story kind of lends itself to that to the way that you just described of how you saw them. Some of them, in very real sense, are throwaway characters. So I'm not sure why Guggenheim and Butters decided to even put them in there as they did. Um, but we can get to that as we encounter that information in the issues. So let's get started. We'll go to issue number 1. We'll do this issue by issue. I'll give a brief synopsis, and then we'll talk about the stuff in the issue. We'll see how that goes. Okay. All right, issue number 1, and so I already mentioned Travis is the one that bought these as they came out in floppies. I, however, could not find issue 1 on the stands at my comic shop, so I elected to wait for the trade. So I'll have to pause every few minutes to briefly thumb through my book, since I'm not going to press it open and hold it like I don't want to ruin the binding of my trade. Okay, episode 1, The Hague. Let's see, that was cover dated November 2010. So it was announced in July of 2010 and came out in November. Let's see. So, brief synopsis. Jarhead, which, like I said, is our Captain America. He's the super soldier type, I should say. That's probably the better description. Fights some terrorist looking for Bin Laden, who it turns out, oh boy, Travis, I suppose it should be implied by now, but we are going to talk about specific things about these issues. And so if you haven't read Halcyon, perhaps you should wait to listen to the episode until you've read it. Or
and you should read it. In my opinion, I liked it.
Okay.
So
yes.
Go read it, and then come back and we'll destroy it for you.
Yeah. Destroy it. No, Travis, we're enhancing the experience.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Let's see, where was I? Looking for Bin Laden, who it turns out was killed by those same terrorists that Jarhead has been looking for. And just as a side note, I have in my notes here, Bin Laden died in May of 2011 when this came out in November of 2010. So, that's just, there you go. There's that information. So all this is being watched by Oculus, who is our villain. He has a conversation with another, an extra dimensional version of himself. which reminds me of something else I've read recently, but I'll talk about that later. Let's see, the next few pages introduce us to Saber, Zenith, and some others before we find basically the whole reason for the title is given to us, which is crime is down to an unnatural level. And also we a big reveal that we find that Zenith and Saber are lovers. And the issue ends with Oculus surrendering himself to the authorities. So Travis, what did you think of this first issue when you first read it? And the reason I ask this is that I find it so our reading experiences will be slightly different, I think, because you read them as they came out, and I read it all at once, within a 20-minute time frame.
Right. I think you probably got the better read than I did.
Oh yeah,
I think so. Because in this series, and I can't remember now because it's been a while since I first experienced and read these things. There was a point where I was like, well, do I want to pick up the rest of the singles or do I want to pick up a trade? Because it was interesting, but I don't know that it was, I wasn't sure where it was going to go, and I didn't know that I wanted to know where it went. But I'm glad, like I said, I'm really glad that I picked up the rest of the issues. I ended up really enjoying it. This first issue starts this. It took a lot to set up the premise, didn't it? To me, it seemed like it seemed like it took a lot of energy to set that up. I don't know. To me it seemed like it. Obviously the first issue is supposed to set up the premise of the story, and it did that. But there were parts of this that, looking back on the whole thing, I don't know that were needed. I don't know. I like the setup of parts of it. That was a curious way to set it up. Oculus turning himself in at the end didn't make any sense at this point to me.
Sure.
I didn't think there was enough information on why he was doing that. I like the introduction of some of the characters and whatnot. There's some great ways that they did it. Like Sable's character, for instance, obviously you get you get a full scope of exactly what a thrill junkie and kind of a crazy guy he is, as to how he goes about taking out the thugs that he takes out, and the last little bit of his initial introduction where they make the comment that gee, what's the problem? Usually you leave at least one dead guy, and he didn't leave any dead guys. That was awesome. Like, ooh, wow, that's kind of and the kind of on his face about that. I just, some of that stuff was interesting. The whole them sleeping together, I don't know that was necessary. I kept waiting for that to be a more important part of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it sets up later on for there to be some pauses in the action, but I don't know. I don't know if that was, yeah. So yeah, when I read this first issue, it had me wondering about the next issue as to, was it really going to go somewhere? Because, like I said, when I got this, I was still expecting it to be, I guess I didn't know what I was expecting it to be, but I guess this wasn't what I was expecting it to be. So it wasn't necessarily delivering at the time what I wanted it to be. Because for some reason, like I said, I had a preconceived that it was going to be, that it was going to be already a utopia, and I didn't realize that it was going to be a story about it moving towards a utopia.
Okay.
So I went into this going, whoa, hey, second panel, guys being obliterated. This doesn't seem like a utopia to me, as we're still beating up terrorists and whatnot. But I still enjoyed it. I like it better now, like I said. But when I first got it, I was still under the impression that it was already a utopia, and it was going to be a bunch of superheroes sitting around going, "Okay, now what do we do?" Not, it's happening, and the question of, as it happens, what's going to go on. So.
Okay, that's Interesting. Because okay, so I went into this just knowing that because I remember reading the solicitation for Utopia in previews, and I
Hmm.
thought, well, that's an interesting premise. I'd like to read that. And then over the course of the next year basically, because I decided to wait for the trade, I'd heard some things, but I tried to keep away from any spoilers or anything.
Uh-huh.
Um, because I like to read the story with my, fresh eyes, with my own take on it as opposed to someone else's. But I think I remember you had posted some things about the series, and I read those. That was probably my only other exposure to it. So I think I already knew, maybe just gleaning stuff from what I had read of the series, that we weren't going into this story, like you say, as expecting a utopia, and then how do the superheroes and other characters deal with that situation. But other than that, I really didn't have any idea of what was going on. So when I read it, you get that introduction with Jarhead and then Oculus. Let's see, Saber really is kind of like the first time where it's really in your face as to, something's up here, because you get his reaction to what that cop said about him. And then we get some more characters. To me, the story, every few pages we get some new characters, and we get a slight movement forward in the plot. Not really that much in this first issue until the end, towards the end, where we have the Halcyon team meeting, where Saber has brought up his idea of the crime dropping, and so they're discussing it, and then basically that leads into the very end, which I thought was a really good way to end a first issue for a comic like this, where the bad guy gives himself up. It's like, well, okay, what the heck?
Yeah.
That I thought that was a really good draw, to get people to buy the second issue. And of course, for reading it in the trade, it's like, okay, let's turn that page right now and find out what the heck's going on. So I thought the first issue was successful in terms of, you introduce the characters, you introduce the the conflict here, which is an interesting idea. Crime is dropping, with the implication of, well, what do these crime fighters do now, if with that event occurring. So I thought that was a pretty good way to get people hooked and to find out what the heck's going on. I actually I like and dislike, in some ways, the reveal of the two, Saber and Zenith, being lovers. Especially, they set them up to be antagonistic towards each other. When he calls her, especially when he calls her Amanda, and she doesn't like that. They end up in bed together. It's like, okay, fine. And just as a side note, Travis, did you notice in that panel where they're shown in bed, there's a bunch of cracks in the wall, the wall next to where the bed is?
Uh-huh.
I just thought that was interesting. Anyway, uh, somebody likes it rough. Anyway,
Yeah.
I, I was hoping that this relationship would be an integral part of the story, and in ways it is, in other ways it's not. Um,
Right.
However, so those are all the things I like about the story. Um, but so what I was trying to do was to go back and think about, okay, how did I feel about this first issue for me it's kind of hard, but like I said, because I read it all at once.
Right.
There was no pause. I got to the end of the first issue in the trade, and I
Sure.
turned the page immediately and started reading the second issue. But
Right.
I was trying to remember how I was feeling as I was reading this, and because there's a lot of information thrown at us,
Hmm.
but I didn't feel so much that you felt overwhelmed with it.
Oh no.
Um, so I think the things that struck me the most were these, and there's only a few things, that we have these analogs, and I kind of expect that. Some characters in how do I say this? These kinds of superhero stories where they examine things in a different light, as opposed to how DC and Marvel just tell these month in, month out superhero stories all the time.
Right.
Where these short-lived pieces of work try to look at the superhero genre in a different light, I'll say. That's probably the best way to put it. So what we get a lot of those times is analogs for these other characters. Like I said at the very beginning, Jarhead's like the Captain America, sort of. Saber is the Batman. Zenith is Superman, that kind of stuff. What struck me about this was that how much Saber not only is, Batman-like, but he's also Midnighter-like from the Authority.
Yeah, definitely.
The ultra-violent version of Batman. So
he's probably sort of Midnight than he is Batman.
Yeah, I agree, and especially considering the way he looks too.
Right.
So you have, so this thus begins the problem I have in general with this comic. You have a character that is based off a character which is based off another character, sort of. And it's the same with Zenith. Zenith, I guess, so to speak. She's more like the female Superman, as opposed to, she's not like Apollo, which is like Superman.
Mm-hmm.
So we have these characters that are derivative, I'll say, to a certain degree. But then again, how many superheroes can how many new concepts for superheroes can you come up with after how many years? Over 75 years worth of superhero comics now.
Yeah.
So I kind of I will forgive that a lot, actually, because I don't want to judge these stories and these characters on the fact that they're not original. Well, there's not a whole lot that's original anyway.
Right. Well, my question would be: does it matter? Does it matter what their superpowers are? To this story, does it really matter what their superpowers are?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Right.
My issue, though, is just kind of how these characters are, not necessarily what their powers are, but how they behave, what their motives are.
What, it was too easy just to make them that? Because see, I guess I don't know that it matters, because that's not really what's at issue.
Mm-hmm.
What their powers are, how original they are, isn't what's at issue, right? The issue is what does a society of superheroes do when there's nothing to, when that gets taken away from them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, you're exactly right. I'm just saying it struck me. It was a very obvious thing that
I see.
I'm reading through this and I was like, wow, this is, this guy's like this, and you even have the relationship between Saber and Zenith, which calls back again to Authority between Midnighter and Apollo. Those two types of characters are lovers, and those two same types of characters in Halcyon are lovers. So first issue, I get several examples of what I said, or what I called derivativeness.
Well, you're right.
Mm-hmm. So that's in the back of my head as I'm reading this. So anyway, I'll stop there at this point. But again, I think for the most part, I thought this was a pretty successful first issue to get us into the story and find out what the heck's going on here.
Yeah. Just as a frame of reference, I can't find a review that I wrote for this issue, but I can find a review for what I wrote for the second issue. And my review starts out with the fact that I wasn't going to pick up issue 2, so issue 1 must have left that kind of an impression on me. The only reason I picked up issue 2 is it happened to be sitting next to another comic that I decided I was picking up, and I had some extra cash in my pocket, and I went, oh, what the hell, I'll pick up number 2 to see what it is. So, obviously, and like I said, I say I like this series now, so it changed my mind somewhere along the way. But,
yeah. Well, again, I think you succinctly put it, Travis. This series, there's a lot of interesting things about it that makes you like it to some degree, but then there's other things like, well, why should I
detract?
Yeah, detract from it. Why should I bother to continue reading it? Now, granted, as I said, I bought it in trade, so I'm like, I'm not going to waste the money. I'm not going to stop reading this. And it's not like I read that first issue and went, nah, this is crap.
Right. So, well, I say at the end of my review that I'm not going to pick up any more issues. I'm not going to pick a trade. It's got some interesting questions in it, but nothing's just got me riveted to, man, I can't wait for next month. I'll pick it up and trade. but obviously that's not the case. I picked up this single issues instead of picking it up in trade.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you probably got the better read out of it than I did.
Yeah, I would agree. It seems like based on your comments thus far, it definitely benefits from a trade read. So, okay, let's move on to issue. Oh wait, no, before we move on to issue 2, I wanted to point out. Actually, I just noticed this. So, I read this several months ago, and I reread it a few weeks ago in preparation for our talk, and I was flipping through it just now as you were talking earlier. And maybe I just misread something, Travis. Maybe you can clear it up. But the time frame of this first issue kind of perplexes me because it starts off with Jarhead fighting the terrorists, and it says the caption is 1 month ago.
Uh-huh.
And then you move a few pages ahead, and it shows Oculus. Again, it says 3 weeks ago.
Uh-huh. Right.
And then, okay, so maybe not. Maybe I just misread that at first. Okay, so a month ago we're shown Jarhead fighting terrorists. Okay, then a week later we're shown Oculus having a conversation with himself, watching what's going on with. Maybe that's what confused me.
Looking back, he's looking back at what happened last week, taking out the terrorists.
Except so you go to the second page where after Oculus shows up, and there's that blue mist, that blue smoke,
right?
And it's exactly the same pose as what's going on in the panel below it.
So he's been fighting terrorists for a week, and it just took him a week to get to where Bin Laden was at.
Right. Okay. So when I first read this, when we get the reveal that the terrorists themselves killed Bin Laden, I read that as, so the crime rate dropping, that whole effect is already in effect. But I don't think that's the case, because the Oculus of the Halcyon world basically got the idea to do what he did, I guess, from his other dimensional self.
Uh-huh.
So how could that be?
No, I think it's already in place. It's already starting to take effect.
So he already started that?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Because we don't get anything else with Oculus, do we, until the very end? No, wait, we do. There's this one page.
Right, where they're on their way to.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, he does say to his manservant Barbinance, or however you say that.
Sure.
That what I've been contemplating for months is the right course of action. So, see, I took that to mean he hasn't actually started it. He's just
I think it's
decided.
Already,
but
I think it's already set in place.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think based on what we've seen before, this indicates that he had started it. He just maybe hasn't fully committed to it until this moment.
He can stop it whenever he wants to.
Oh, sure.
At this point, right? So he started it, and I think he's looking to see how it's taking effect before he does his next move, which of course is turn himself in.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense. I guess that when I was just flipping through it now, based on what I remembered reading of it, something didn't make sense. But I think that's exactly right. That's what's going on here. So, okay, that makes sense now. We can move on to issue 2. All right, issue 2, cover dated December, so it came out a month later after issue 1. That's good. Interestingly, issue 2 starts out 1 month later after issue 1, so that's a nice bit of symmetry there. The superheroes lament the lack of a need for them. They're discussing this. Let's see here. Saber finds see, I should really, really type up my notes next time we do something like this, Travis. I'm sorry. It's Saber finds the girlfriend, Cyclops' girlfriend, and then goes after Tragic, the character Tragic, thinking that character had something to do with Cyclops' disappearance. The issue ends with most of the members of the Halcyon team announcing to the world that they were retiring. That's pretty much how I saw this second issue. There's not a whole lot going on in this.
Yeah.
We get a few character moments.
Yeah, there is, but...
Yeah, but you're right. I guess I kind of shortchanged this this issue, but that was, as I was reading through it, I'm taking notes. That's kind of the highlights of it. So,
Okay.
what would you think? What else should we mention on about issue 2?
Well, okay, the fact that Tragic is as a villain, right?
Right.
And so
Did I not mention that?
no, you just
Okay.
said the character Tragic. You didn't
Oh,
say there was a
sorry.
villain.
Yes, he is a villain. He's kind of a bastard too.
Oh, he definitely is. He's evil all in all. The only
Yeah.
reason he isn't totally despicable, I assume, is because slowly everybody's becoming these nice, non-homicidal, people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, he's absolute cretin. Some of the earlier panels that first talk about him, it shows him, you know, looks like covered in blood, swinging a knife, and there's a bunch of, it looks like an entire family hanging by their necks behind him. So obviously the guy's despicable, from that standpoint. Um, yeah, this issue, like I said, from my, looking back at my review from almost a year ago, there's some curious questions in here, some things that are interesting, but it never delivered a, oh man, what's going to happen next feeling for me to be excited to pick up the next issue.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's
So I don't,
exactly it. Because
I don't know why.
because the big reveal at the end, the big, okay, come back for the third issue is, oh, we're retiring.
Yep, we're all done.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was the wrong way to end this issue.
I think
Because then
so
you're like,
too.
okay, so, other than the stuff, like I said, other than the stuff that has to do with Sable, that's the only interesting part is
Persistence.
his continued persistence, and people continue to point out, look, man, you should be, normally he would be butchering these people because he's a killer. I mean, he's a vigilante who seems to have no qualms. We've gotten the impression with the fact he has no qualms with, killing the bad guys. That's his answer to to dealing with the criminal element. If they're dead, then they can't be a criminal element anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it posed some more interesting questions in this. Like the one page that has to do with Jarhead, for instance. What the hell is he going to do now?
Mm-hmm.
He's this, hyper bred, super soldier. There's no wars. Everybody's completely in stand down mode. So, how does that, all work out and stuff? So, and the other part in here, is this the one where they talk about that, oh, I can't remember top of my head. If this is the one where they talk about, well, yeah, the fact that Oculus has set all of his minions up to be, into a World Aid Organization, his
Mm-hmm.
entire
Yeah.
criminal element. So that's an interesting thing too. It's like, what the hell's going on? Like I said, there's some really interesting questions in here. It just, yeah, it didn't deliver it the right way, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. I
It
did.
it didn't end on an exciting note for me, like I said, to be going, oh man, what's the next issue going to be like? So now I'm trying to figure out why the hell I picked up the last issue.
I was just going to ask you that too.
I,
So I enjoyed, though, the opening of this series, or sorry, issue 2,
this issue
with Transom. Yeah, crime may be down, but there's all sorts of things going on where people still die every day, through accidents or natural disasters. Just things happen that they still are needed. They're just not needed to go off and fight individual criminals or even criminal organizations any longer, or at least not as much as they used to. There's still a need for them, and that still kind of bugged me. And we get it very obviously with the opening here with Transom doing what he can to save this coastal city. And you're telling me that the entire world can't still use these people?
right.
So, okay. So then the angst of them not being needed in the world anymore is undercut by this to me. So I question the motive behind the plot, I guess. It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of reason for them to go, yeah, maybe I should retire, or I'm not needed, and that really makes me sad. because we get that full on next issue with one of the characters. So like I said, I like that whole thing with Transom. The conversation with the heroes, again discussing their obsolescence. I thought we didn't perhaps need that as much. But yeah, I like the stuff with Saber, talk to the girlfriend of Cyclops. Although I thought that conversation perhaps went a little too long. So maybe
plus the fact we don't know who Cyclops is, right?
yeah. Other than I think you can infer from their conversation that she's an associate of the group.
Right, but we were never introduced to her though.
That's true because the writers wanted to do that reveal. I think next issue, or maybe it's the fourth issue. I can't remember now. Yeah. But that's fine. I can forgive that. That whole fight though between Saber and Tragic though that was pretty cool in the sense of wow, this guy is just a total nut job.
Yeah. He should be taken out.
Evil of the Course should be taken out, and again, it's pointed out to us. See, here's that derivative thing again. We were told already in issue 1 that Saber has changed, and yet we're reminded of it yet again.
Right.
Do we need that every issue? But I still like the fact he's beaten this guy to a pulp, and and the guy's just he's forefront with him with Saber. And it makes Saber go to that next level in terms of, okay, what's happening here? Where do I need to go to get this information? So, so it does provide a reason for being in the story, this scene.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I think it also helps drive home the point that he really needs to figure out what's going on because, how bothersome would that be to suddenly having people point out, especially despicable people point out, that you're fundamentally changed and you have no rationale as to why you're fundamentally changing. Me personally, on a personal level, I find that very disturbing and want to know, what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
And so that keeps the drive there, but then they kill it in this issue by going on to the retirement thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And also, there's a page here with Zenith where she's flying through the clouds, and you get her inner monologue, which I liked.
Mm-hmm.
However, again, going back to that derivative idea, this reminded me specifically of something I read in Astro City many years ago. So there's a scene in one of those issues of Astro City where the Samaritan has a very, very similar inner monologue that we see here about that she can fly and she's free to do so, and she's it's all this stuff that all the responsibility, the weight of that is kind of off her shoulders, and she feels good about that. And it's just, like I said, it's very, very similar to what I've read in Astro City. Now that could just be a huge coincidence, but like I said, there's just many things in here that makes me think of other things I've read, and not just that's kind of similar to X. This is very, very similar to X. So, but that's that's partly the benefit, more or less benefit, or not so much a benefit of a long-time reader. I think you're gonna make these connections, if provided you can remember them.
Right.
Which I'm having trouble doing these days. Anyway, the older I get. So I don't know. I tried to, like I said, there's nothing new under the sun really, so I try to forgive that, but I'm having a hard time with this, Travis. And this is just issue 2.
Right. So it's not okay to play homage to that sort of thing, or to what if they're purposely doing that? I'm not saying ripping somebody else off, but what if they're purposely putting those things in there because it sets up the commonality of all of this superhero stuff for them to then later on turn this on its ear even more as the whole effect gets bigger and bigger.
I think that's a very valid
But obviously it's not working. It's obviously not working for you though.
I don't think it's, but I don't
You don't think they're
read
doing
this
that?
as an homage. I don't. I think this is just either Guggenheim independently came up with these ideas, or maybe, sometimes this happens, because I've done it too in my own writing, where, I've read something that I really liked about somebody else's work, and I decided to try and incorporate it in, but do it in a way that is not a direct callback to it. And,
Right. Okay.
obviously you can succeed at that, or sometimes you can fail. And I think in some of these cases, Travis, I think Guggenheim and Butters are failing.
Oh,
But again, it could just be a huge coincidence.
right.
So like I said, I'm of two minds of this book, and I'm not sure which side is winning at this point. Um, okay.
Well,
Anything? Go
well,
ahead.
yeah. Like I said, for me, I had no. I mean, number two. I thought, well, I'll still save money picking it up and trade. It's got some interesting questions in it, but it didn't. It wasn't. It wasn't holding me down for me to go, man. What's going to happen next?
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it had some interesting questions in it, but at this point, I fully intended that I was going to hope it was going to make the trades, and that I'd pick it up and trade.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was, like I said, for me, there was some interesting stuff in here, but there were lots of other parts in it that just kind of, well, pulled its own legs out from underneath itself. The way this issue ends, for instance, with the last 3 pages being their announcement that they're going to retire. That just took the steam out of everything, really.
Mm-hmm.
So what? So they're going to retire. So what?
Yeah.
What does that matter? What does that matter to the story? For me, the interesting part of the story is this pursuit of why is it happening? So yeah.
Yeah, too slow going. They should have perhaps moved that part of the story along a little further in issue 2.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's unless you have anything else to say about issue 2, let's move to
What they should have done is they should have put the end of the comic before he beats the hell out of Tragic and left that be the end. They should have made that the end of the comic.
before he beats up Tragic.
So move the retirement on Hero Plaza. Put that before he.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Before we get the pages of him slapping the crap out of Tragic. So we ended. The final page of the book would have been the guy
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good way to end it.
Him saying the fact, look, you beat these people, blah, 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 unless you've changed, and that panel of him pausing and then him starting to walk away and the guy, the evil guy said, welcome to my world, but, welcome to the world, buddy. And that should have been the end of the issue.
Yeah, that's
and that would have made me going, that's what I would have remembered after I finished reading it. And I would have went, oh, I think I'm going to pick up number 3. As opposed to 3 pages of, the world's become a perfect place. Everything's so happy and joyful. We don't need to be anymore, and we're moving into retirement. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Let's move on to issue 3. Let's see. Issue 3 cover dated January 2011. So again, the next month, I believe. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. All right. Issue 3, Triumph's Secret. And basically, and I'm probably going to give this issue, again, short shrift as far as the synopsis, but Saber continues to look for clues, leading him ultimately to the now dead Cyclops, as revealed to us. Oculus hands over the formula to cure all cancers. And, I mean, there's some other things going on too, other details, but then at the end, we get the big reveal, the big moment of the end of the issue. Triumph kills herself. And that's pretty much how I saw that issue.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts off with Triumph, especially so we get some inner monologue from her. She's up on this building. There's something you don't know about me. It's not a secret. You've seen her in action or read about her, blah, blah, blah. It's not a secret, but there's something you don't know, and she flies off the building, and we don't get that back, or we don't get the result of that until the very end, where we find out she doesn't know how to fly, or she can't fly, and she's killed herself. She makes a little crater at the street below. All right. I could have done without that entirely. That whole triumph sequence. It's from a writing perspective, in my mind, this is wasted material. It's also we haven't been given any sense that this person is hurting so badly about the lack or the world doesn't need her anymore, that it affects her that badly that she needs to kill herself. She's that depressed that she needs to jump off a building. That's just bad character writing to me. And it seems to me that it was done more for dramatic effect as opposed to being true to what the character was about. But then again, we were not given a whole lot about her, right? Even at the very beginning, like you mentioned earlier, it says Triumph, superheroine, and that's it. That's all we know about her. I did like, though, sorry, I was going to say Halcyon, but Saber goes to Halcyon headquarters and runs into Transom, who's recovering from an injury. I like what Transom said. Being the only hero in the world's taken a toll, and then through slitted eyes, Saber replies, "Not the only one."
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. We do get, the idea of that whole people trying to investigate this phenomenon, them not being or not wanting to pursue it,
right,
or not being able to do it. They get nosebleeds and all this stuff, and we see that happening to Saber. And then Saber, of course, has, we get a flashback with his encounter with Cyclops, and so I think it's very obvious here in that scene where, obviously Cyclops is behind this to some degree.
Right.
And then we have a few more pages of him in the present saying basically the same thing. So to me, it's kind of repetitive. I guess we didn't need, both scenes right next to each other like that. But it makes sense to spell out what Saber thinks is going on.
Right.
And it's also tied to what is this? Doesn't say here. Oh, Spherical. The company Spherical. So they offered Cyclops a job, so that's what he's going off to investigate, and he gets Zenith to fly him there, and they have a conversation. And this is where we get that, like I said before, I was hoping that their relationship would come into play again, and it does here a little bit. They talk about them, and it's not just about sex. She caresses his face. He, of course, being the Batman-like character he is, he pushes her hand away. And she, delivers the blow to him, though, saying, is the reason you're seeing a dark conspiracy in all this is so in a world without crime, your life will have some meaning? I thought that was a nice touch. I really enjoyed, though, the 2 or 3 pages of Oculus and this doctor, the head of the World Health Organization, and he's got all these equations and written on the walls and on the floor, and the reveal that this is the cure for all cancers.
Right.
I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And as we find out, Oculus is behind all this ultimately. But at this point, I thought the writers did a pretty good job of kind of putting that question in your mind.
Oh, sure, definitely.
By this scene, it's like, wow, maybe it's not him. Maybe this is something else.
Right.
Although, I mean, when you read this, Travis, did you after reading this scene with Oculus, did you think that he was still behind it?
Yeah, I was like, well, this is really interesting, and that I assumed that he was still behind it in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, at this point, I'm really starting to think, okay, what's the final hand that he's gonna lay down?
What's the end game?
Because I mean, he just gave them the cure for all cancers.
Mm-hmm.
If the end game is screwing up a few superheroes, so what? He just gave the cure for all cancers. I'm thinking, this is, at this point, I was getting excited about the book because I'm thinking, man, I mean, there's some really interesting questions here. So if he is behind the whole thing and somehow this is all gonna, muhahaha, he's gonna have the final laugh, how's that gonna work? And in the kind of world that we live in, maybe the payoff's worth it. If this is just a beef between all the craziness that goes on is a beef between this, quote unquote supervillain and a bunch of superheroes. If they took each other out and in the process it made everybody else a better place, okay, where's the bad in that? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I kind of assumed that in some way he was going to be behind it in some sense. Mm-hmm. But then I also wondered if he had lost control too.
Yes.
If it really was his game plan, what's the final hand? What's the final thing going to be? I was at this point, I was real curious.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I want you to keep that in mind because I want to come back to that at the end of this because that's very, it's very, integral to, the overall effect of this story. So I want to get back to that. I got to this moment in the issue is, we talked about how the writers introduce the characters with their name and then kind of a really brief caption of who they are. And Null didn't have that in issue 1. But then we get it here in issue 3. Null, retired superhero, current team deathmatch junkie. So he's been reduced to that.
Yep.
But then we kind of see, what he is. He taps into the information superhighway. Right. He becomes. He's digitized in this one sort of splash page. As he becomes zeros and ones. I thought that was kind of a neat thing. That's the thing about these kind of stories. You're introduced to some new types of characters, like Null to some degree, but we really don't get a whole lot with them. And like Triumph too, it's like she's just this big muscly woman, and that's it. That's all she was until the death scene.
Yeah.
The suicide scene. But at least with Null, we kind of get a little bit more of him, and it looks kind of cool. The artist did, I think, a pretty good job of rendering that. Let's see. And then right before the end of the comic, we get Saber and Zenith find a Tesseract, and they go into that and find the half-decapitated Cyclops.
Yeah.
And the caption there, telepath, in parentheses, deceased. Really?
Deceased.
Do we really? She's not maybe alive there?
You don't know what her powers are. Maybe she can function just fine without a brain.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I did like that scene though, where Zenith and Saber are talking, and they see it's this little cube, this miniature cube thing. It's smaller on the outside than it is on the inside, type thing. Anyway, but he says, "Can you open it?" And she gives him that face, like, "Oh, please."
Right.
And smashes it.
Shoves her hand through it,
yeah. And like I said, the issue ends with Triumph killing herself. And like I said, that was just a big waste to me.
Yeah. See, I didn't mind that at all.
Yeah?
Yeah. I was okay with that. I don't know. I mean, yeah, it would have been nice to have known more about the character, to be invested in the fact that her life is obviously miserable without this. But I guess I just took it as the fact is that that's really all she has ever been. There is nothing else for her. So
just end it. Let's just end the life.
Sure. She doesn't know how to function.
I guess
there are people out there who are sick. Okay. So no. Yes, it was for shock value. It sets it up in the first page, and you don't see the end of it until the last page. I don't know. I guess to me, it's one response of many that we get to see in here of what these people are doing with their existences now that now that they don't have anything left. One guy's continuing to be a hero because he still thinks there's things to do. One guy's doing some scientific stuff. One guy has become, an Uber video game champion, you know, some people don't have anything else and don't know what to do with themselves. I guess.
You know,
So I guess to me it wasn't that big of an issue.
I again, like I've said before, I'm of two minds of this story, and on one hand, I can see Triumph and her suicide being the shorthand for, this has really affected these people in a major way, some of these people in a very major way, and this is
Right.
how, she chose to deal with it. But, I can't forgive the shorthand in the storytelling itself. So
Okay.
I can
Yeah,
see
I
why they
found.
want to do it, but I don't like how they did it.
Yeah, and I found the review I wrote for this one, and I
Hmm.
ended up picking up this because yet again it was sitting next to something else I was planning on picking up off the rack, and I thought, well, because there were all these lingering questions still, so I thought, what the heck, I'll pick it up, and for me this was a turning point in the comic. For me,
Yeah.
I read this, and there was just enough stuff going on in it that it got me excited about, well, hell, what's really happening here? You got this superhero that looks like gave up her life and brain to potentially shut this whole thing down, and yeah, I don't know, and the whole thing with our supposed main uber villain of the planet, giving us the cure for cancer, all cancers, and yeah, if this is the issue that turned the corner for me, it made me go, wow, now I want to know. I want to know what's going on
Hmm.
next. So I was for sure picking up, the rest of it at this point. I wasn't going to wait for the trade.
Okay. All right, let's move on to issue number 4. Came out, as you said earlier, March of 2011. This is Theory Test. Let's see. Both Saber and Enos examine the dead bodies of their peers. Saber realizes who is responsible for the change in the world. Or at least it's revealed to us, the readers, that he knows. Um, I would think he would have known earlier in the last issue, but it wasn't explicitly spelled out. Jarhead briefs an assembly of generals talking about the military buildup across the world and how if the phenomenon should cease all of a sudden, World War III would likely ensue. So we get, well, we'll come back to that. Saber infiltrates the prison where Oculus is, and we find out that he is indeed behind this phenomenon. Saber tortures Oculus via his pet crime-fighting dog, Evie, which that was really cool.
I love
That
that.
was a good way to get around the whole
Yep.
nonviolence phenomenon.
Yep. Which is
Um,
obviously getting a lot worse. Yeah. But
yeah.
yeah.
To find out where the device that Oculus has created, which turns out to be in his headquarters, of course. When Saber gets there, he is greeted by Zenith and some other superheroes, and that's the issue. Um, let's see here. So Travis, what jumped out at you in this issue as interesting or
Uh,
not?
well, that whole scene with Oculus and whatnot, I thought that was great. Him busting in the place to get to talk to the guy, and basically saying, I know you're behind the whole thing, and using the dog. I absolutely love that.
That was
Uh,
good.
that's hilarious, because he's just, obviously he's beyond miserable there. I mean, he's bleeding out of just about every orifice that we can see at that point. Um, because he can't do it. He sure would want to, but he can't do it. So, instead he sends the dog that, since I can't touch you, and then the next when they're flying off the plane, it's like that was fun.
Yeah.
I, I got a kick out of that part of it. Um,
Well, I liked how, when he first shows up at Oculus's cell, Oculus is really condescending and superior. I'm the superior intellect. And then at the end, he's like, he brings a dog and he says, "I'm testing a theory." I thought that was a great
yeah,
um,
yeah,
uh,
kind of a
mirror.
poke it.
Yeah, well, a great mirror to what Oculus, is. He's the super intellect. He's the smart guy in the room, and yet here's this street level crime fighter, um, kind of throwing that back in his face. It's like, well, I can test a theory here too, and you're gonna pay, buddy. Yeah, that was really cool. That was probably, what does that say about us, Travis? That the threat of torture happening to Oculus is the best thing about this, or the one thing we're talking about in this issue.
Because I mean, well, I think it was funny. It's a way around the whole.
Yeah. It was a clever way around it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, let's take this moment to its next level. What if that hadn't happened? What if the dog couldn't have done that? He would have done, the writers would have done something else. I just, doing what they did with Watchmen, I'm doing it now with their story.
Yeah.
At least in this moment.
We'd be screwed. Well, no, it wouldn't be screwed. I mean, everybody would be all happy, and at some point, Saber's head would explode.
Yes, I was going to say, except for Saber, but he'd be dead.
He'd bleed to death, or his head would explode from continuing to question the stuff as much as he is, and that would be, that would be the end of it, right? Mm-hmm. I kind of thought the whole thing at the Pentagon was kind of interesting and kind of scary.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we get this huge weight of potential danger,
right,
and destruction thrown in,
just waiting to explode.
But of course, nothing really happens. I mean, that threat is still there at the end of the series. Yes.
Well, but it is still there. I mean, yeah, nothing happens. There is no World War. But the fact is that there's this continuing insanity of buildup. If something happens and we suddenly get the aggressive button back, the whole thing is just going to be catastrophic. Mm-hmm. It's not like it's going to be a slow slip back into our old ways. With this buildup that's happening, it's going to be catastrophic. I don't know. I thought that was frightening. The idea that there's just this, whatever it is out there, because at this point we don't 100% know, whatever it is that's maintaining this, if it goes oops and breaks, stops, or whatever, there's going to just be this, like I said, not a slow slip back and never being aggressive. There's going to be this huge, potentially just catastrophic. I don't know. I thought that was extremely alarming, mm-hmm. the idea of it. And man, if Saber's successful in shutting the thing down, all hell breaks loose.
Right. So we
doesn't just go back to being the old ways. It's worse than the old ways.
Exactly. But and it becomes more of a worldwide issue as opposed to, these poor superheroes and they're not needed anymore. Right. So the weight of the story, the weight of the conflict has certainly ratcheted up to 15.
Oh yeah.
On a scale of 1 to 10 by this one scene. This one page, actually, of the story. But again, here's my problem with it is that it's thrown in, just kind of thrown in the story. It's like that that hasn't been talked about before. The last we saw Jarhead, he was being told he's obsolete, and now all of a sudden we get this huge reveal that World War III could come if this phenomenon just stops. So. Mm-hmm. Again, yes, it's a frightening thought, and obviously it brings a lot of weight to Saber's actions by the end of the story. But again, like I said, it was just kind of thrown in there, and I question the technique that the writers employ to bring this in.
So they shouldn't have added it?
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the series should have been
10 issues long to cover all that.
No.
I don't see how you have. It's got to be one or the other, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know. Maybe if we would have gotten this earlier, perhaps. I don't know. And maybe if we would have had this.
Well, I think earlier it wouldn't have worked because we're building to the climax. This is issue 4. There's only one issue after this. You need as much weight as possible, right? Mm-hmm. As telling a good story, mm-hmm. you need as much weight as possible going into the final, into the end of the story, right? This is just, to me, this is just more of the buildup of the pressure that's involved with what stakes are involved. Because otherwise, the only stakes that are involved is this is personal. Mm-hmm. It's personal. Mm-hmm. And
I don't disagree with what you're saying.
And the world, and there needs to be some showing there that it's affecting the world in some other way other than we're now all, wearing flowers in our hair and loving our neighbors.
Yeah. Well, I just this you know this is just my personal preference. I would have liked this kind of this weight. I keep saying
Mm-hmm.
a little earlier in the story, just so it wasn't just a story of Saber trying to figure out what the heck's going on through these 4 issues.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I really think that's a minor point. I just wanted to remark about it. What I really like though about this issue was the conversation. Again, we get back to the relationship between Zenith and Saber.
Yeah.
That
the very end of the comic.
Yeah. Well, yes. Yeah. Basically, basically, we already know he's going to follow this to the very end if it kills him or not. But the question is, if they become opposing forces, what is she going to do?
Right.
And of course, what's he going to do in response? Because he even spells it out. What are you prepared to do to stop me? And he keeps walking away, and he says, and she does nothing, of course, and he says, that's what I thought. But
Mm-hmm.
She does follow him to talk to him about it more, and so again we get a little. It's kind of a repetitive scene, but it does forward the plot. And there is a panel here where Saber is actually, he admits that he loves her, and he does have a tear in his eye. So,
Yep.
so there's the emotional weight that I've been waiting for in this story in the next to last issue. It's like, yes, this is exactly the kind of stuff I like to read about between characters. So this is when the story became really interesting to me on a character level. So this is where, if I were you and I've been reading these issue to issue monthly, month to month, this is where I would have went, yes, I can't wait for the next issue to see what happens between these two.
Mm. I like the ending of this issue.
Oh, when
I thought this is kind of your perfect.
Yeah, the perfect issue ending moment.
Yeah, the way this one ends, that you asked me earlier what I was going to do about it. Well, I figured it out. And of course, it's a 2-page thread reveal of of a bunch of her buddies. Well, not even her buddies. I mean, heck, it's even got Creepazoid in it. So
yeah, Tragic's there, and some new characters. Well, sort of new. I mean, the two. So I'm looking at that 2-page splash ending here, and the two characters on the far left and the far right. We've
seen them before, but
saw them. Yeah, they were kind of in the background, but we don't know who they are.
Right. Well, because I don't think it really, in the grand scheme of things,
no, it doesn't matter. But I'm just saying, if they just, well, I guess the armored guy we haven't seen at all, if I remember correctly. But yeah, you're right. It doesn't really matter. I just pointed that out, that we actually have seen at least those two before. Yeah. That ending was great. The issue 4 really ratcheted up. We talked about the whole Pentagon scene, but and the moments between Zenith and Saber. But yeah, we get to this point. It's like, yeah, got to read the next issue for sure. Okay, Travis, just so you know. Okay, let's move on to the last issue, Reflection. As you say, it came out in May. So between issue 3 and 4, there was a 2-month gap, and then between issue 4 and 5, there was a 2-month gap. That was interesting. I'd like to know why. And we haven't talked about the art at all in this. We're just going through the story. So we will talk about the art at some point here. But let's move on to what this issue is about. And this is what's in my notes, Travis. The fight issue. And that's basically it, right? They have a big fight. But I do have a whole page of notes on this one issue alone. It's the most I wrote about any of these issues. Let's see here. Zenith talks to Saber, who turns out to actually not be Saber, because Saber has employed another superpowered being to help him, while he goes and infiltrates Oculus's base and comes across Enos and Transom. They fight. Saber has this, and then the last issue, he actually showed it to Zenith. He has this little device that he calls it a nullifier. So it nullifies their powers, although we're not told how that exactly works.
Right.
But, we're just supposed to accept, okay, he knows how to build something like this. Okay, whatever. Transom, runs at Saber and grabs him, and he's still running when Saber activates the nullifier, and Transom crashes into a wall at super speed, killing him, presumably. Let's see here. Saber finds Oculus's weapons cache and a note addressed to him. This is. Let's see. And then we cut to a scene with Zenith fighting the person who was the distraction, who turns out to be a character called Camo.
Yep.
Who can,
shape-shifting
or some sort of illusion to so he appears to be he can appear as someone else, and I have a problem with that whole scene, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's see. Inside, the remaining heroes that Zenith has recruited search for Saber, who is now wearing Oculus's armor. He of course takes them all out. Let's see. Zenith, with Null's help, takes out Camo and Saber's dog in a gruesome scene.
Oh, yeah.
Where Zenith tears Evie in half. Saber fights Enos, and Enos ends up dying from the fall in that scene. Zenith then shows up, but Saber knocks her out. Jarhead then shows up with the entire U.S. Army at his disposal. But Saber is yet again prepared for this with a bomb that wipes out the army. And this really interesting. We talked about talking about the art.
I love that. I love that shot.
Yeah, that shot's really cool. That they did. Let's see here. Inside again, Zenith confronts Saber. He tells her that she should kill him, but she just tells him to go. Again, a repetitive scene telling us something that we already knew, but. So Zenith and the army stand guard over the device that Oculus created, while Saber uses Oculus's resources to plan the destruction of the device, and thus ends the issue and the series. Okay. Final issue, Travis. What do you think about it?
I liked it. I enjoyed the fight. I enjoyed watching him basically kick the hell out of the rest of the superheroes, basically. And this, to some degree falls back to, what if, the equivalent of Batman decided he was, done playing games with everybody and just decided to, grease everybody that got in his way for whatever his ultimate goal was. I like the argument between her and him at the very beginning of the, the very beginning of the thing. But I like the fact that he employed his own super villain to help him sneak into the place, and it seems like that guy's got a personal beef with the heroes, so of course he has no problem with with messing with them.
And
you're right.
That reminds me, though, we should mention that it turns out that the closer you are to the device, it doesn't affect you. So they can have this fight.
Right.
So just
you're right.
A point that needed to be mentioned.
Yeah. Granted, they don't tell us how that device works, but they had to do something. I guess, otherwise there wouldn't be something there wouldn't be anything to the story if they could just, he shows up and there's an army of, superheroes there to keep him from, shutting down the device and whatnot. The whole setup with him going in and, there's a note there for him, to use the armor and all that kind of stuff. I'm reading that and I'm going, okay, so we're getting the real, the real final, the real final thing's going to happen. The real reveal as to what Oculus's real plan was is now underway, because he knew he was coming. He knew he was going to make it there. He knew he'd figure it out. He'd get there somehow. It's the gruesome scene where what's her name tears the dog in half.
Mm-hmm.
I just like the fact that Nola's like, oh boy, he's not going to be happy about that. You know,
Yeah.
not sure it is, you know, just the whole that whole part of it. You know, you know, like I said, I like the fact that he wears the armor, kicks the crap out of pretty much everybody.
Mm-hmm.
The scene where you know Jarhead beats the hell out of him for a little bit there and goes, you know, you dipshit. You know, you didn't think I wasn't going to bring the whole army with me,
Mm-hmm.
and his just, you know, okay, you know, and obliterating them all. That was pretty awesome. Like, holy cows, you know. And the fact that when he gets down below, of course, the last person he has to fight is, you know, is Amanda. And of course, he doesn't have the bomb anymore to potentially deal with her. That might have been his one, you know, way to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I love the ending of this, where he ends up, he is Oculus, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't he basically Oculus? So Oculus wins, doesn't he? In the fact that he basically killed how many heroes end up getting killed out of this whole thing? And the few that are left are pitted against each other.
Yes. Yeah, it's quite the evil scheme.
Oh yeah, heck yeah. I just don't see that many comics where the bad guy wins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, the hero's always, you know, coming out on top.
Well,
do they come out on this?
And you know, this is where this I think this final issue is kind of like the saving grace of this series for me, because not only does the villain win, and we know I've read stories where the villain has won, quote unquote, but the way that the villain went about doing it, the way that the writers have penned this story to show Oculus building this device that gives us world peace, essentially, you know, but at a cost, you know, as Saber notes in this issue, free will doesn't come with fine print, but
right.
we still have world peace. So yeah, is that it's a great philosophical and moral question, you know, is it okay that we have world peace at the cost of us choosing to have world peace on our own? And the fact that he turns one of the world's hero, you know, quote unquote heroes, although Saber was always borderline anyway, into the adversary of the world, and he's continually trying to destroy world peace for the world. So that was a great idea.
Yeah, he becomes the ultimate villain. The fact that his goal now is to destroy that thing, which basically, and on a more personal level, obviously those two are not going to have a relationship probably ever again.
No. Yeah.
And most of all the heroes that we were introduced to in the book are dead, except for Zenith and him.
Noel was also.
Oh yeah, you're right.
He doesn't get killed, does he? I can't remember.
I don't know unless he
was outside.
If he was outside, if he wasn't inside when he set off that bomb.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they were all outside.
Yeah,
because it looks it looks like Zenith was, the only one that wasn't outside, perhaps. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
So I love the ending of it.
Yeah.
You know, the book's got faults through it and whatnot. I thought the payoff at the end, though, was great. You know, just the whole, how it all, you know, is set in place. Now, does it actually address the question, what happens in a world with superheroes when there's no more crime to fight? I don't know that it does that. It never did really answer the question that when I first heard about this book, as originally, when the first things were being talked about it, I don't know that it answered those, but I don't know that one wouldn't have been a really boring comic. You know, a comic about superheroes living in a world where there is no crime anymore. If you just kept it at that base value, I don't know, that would probably be a boring story. Because I mean, you're right. What would there be to do?
Yeah.
You know. But yeah, like I said, I thought the ending of this was worth the issues that it had.
So do you think, though, that this could have been better suited if it were a 3-issue miniseries as opposed to a 5? You know, cut out some of the fat in here? Or do you think everything in there that we've talked about in all 5 issues, you know, moves everything along enough without needing to trim anything out?
No, I don't think as a whole. I mean, there are probably little things, but like I disagree with you about the Pentagon thing. I think that's an important, important piece of it. And did it need to be sooner? I don't know that. Well, maybe it needed to be. I don't even know that it needed to be sooner. I actually think there are more things missing that should have been added as opposed to things taken out.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
It would have been nice to have had a little more frame of reference for some of the other characters that were in it and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been interesting to have some more world view because we didn't really get much world view other than everything's getting better. Other than the Pentagon scene, that's the only real, if I remember correctly, the only real world view thing we get.
Yeah.
How does this affect the world other than simply saying, well, nobody wants to hurt anybody else anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I
totally agree with that.
Yeah. So, but then I like the way they delivered some of the stuff. I liked the whole Cyclops thing and whatnot. That I thought that was interesting, putting her as, she's a character, but she's obviously a dead character. Beforehand.
Let's see. So I wanted to just talk about a few things, some particular things about this issue. So I mentioned before camo. When we find out that who we think that Zenith is talking to is Saber actually isn't. It's camo. So I mentioned I had a little problem with that when we're discussing the previous issue, and so we see the scene in issue 4 where Saber is flying with his dog out to Oculus's headquarters, and we get his inner monologue here. And he lands the plane, and we see this scene where Zenith is in the forefront, and Saber and the dog is in the background with the jet. And he utters a curse word and says, "Guess I'm not the only smart one." And then he walks towards her, and they start having the conversation. Well, it turns out
it's not him. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a problem with that. I realized why they did it. They had to have the fake out and all that stuff. That's fine. But the way that it was done. It seems, I guess you can make the argument that this is camo now, thinking these things, but it doesn't fit. The way it's written doesn't fit.
Yeah, and you know what? I didn't catch that until yesterday when I was thumbing back through these things, reading over them again because I knew we were going to be talking about this. Because of course there was 2 months between this comic and the last one.
Yeah, and
so that little thing wouldn't remember, but I'm sure reading the trade where you're just going right from one right to the next, yeah, it would stick out like a sore thumb. So,
yeah. And like I said, I from a storytelling standpoint, it's a nice little way to perform a sleight of hand. But it's kind of, I thought it was kind of lazy on the writer's part to do that. But let's see here.
Well, part of it, how is he having that whole argument with her? To some degree.
Well, you can. I read that once you get the reveal that it's camo, everything he says makes sense given the assumption that camo feels very similar to Saber.
Well, yeah.
And I think in some ways too, camo does talk a little differently from Saber, and I think it's shown here in some of the words that he uses. So I can see that. They have similar viewpoints, and so he's making Saber's argument for him, but he happens to have the same argument. So
yeah,
one presumes that Saber and Camo talked about it.
He does say after they introduce Cameo, it does say down there Saber's creeping through the tunnel, saying, like I'm the only one in the world thinks this is unnatural. So
exactly.
I mean, yeah,
exactly, yeah. We mentioned the Eevee getting torn apart, and then that panel where they show that where it's getting into the art a little bit. It's the dog and Zenith are in black, and everything else is red around it, just shades of red. I thought that was an interesting way of doing that. I'm glad that we didn't actually get to see a more realistic blood and guts shot.
Right.
I was glad we were spared that because there's a lot of blood and guts in this already.
Oh, yeah.
And then again, speaking about the art, we mentioned earlier that shot. It's basically a 2-page spread of when the bomb goes off and you see And again, a great use, I don't know if this is the penciler or the color artist or what, but a great use of minimalized color, because there's a shot of the bomb going off and you see um, Jarhead being obliterated
Right.
to the point, he's got the skull is showing and the rest of his body is slowly being blown away. But it's
Right.
everything in the background is white, and everything that is, something in the foreground is all red or outlined red. It's not like there's no other colors in here. So I thought that was a great way to depict that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, and then again, come back to the relationship between Saber and Zenith. Here it is. This is it. This is the end of them, and they both know it. And she again, she can't bring herself to stop him. She could easily stop this right now.
Oh yeah.
He has nothing left. He has no tricks up his sleeve. She would just have to. She could very easily kill him, and
Yep.
she can't because she's in love with him. So in the previous issue, Saber admits he loves her.
Yeah.
This is where we find out that actually, I think, Zenith loves him.
Mm-hmm.
Before you could kind of assume that she didn't stop him before because they did have a relationship, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that she's in love with him. But here, she has tears running down her face and tells him to go, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get the next 2 pages where I almost said Oculus. And it is Oculus. It's the new.
He is.
It's the
He
new
is.
Oculus. Yeah. But Saber now has taken on Oculus's identity and his resources, planning his next move. Again, talking about the art, there's this great the next to last panel of the next to last page. It shows Saber holding Oculus's helmet, and you see Saber's face reflected in it. I thought that was a great shot.
Yep.
And then the final page, he's there, he's sitting there, he's got his helmet on, he's now fully Oculus. Evie has survived to some degree as some sort of cybernetic dog, and what's his name, Barbnance, the manservant, is standing behind the new Oculus, and he's got this. This is great. That look of I can't believe this guy's here. I'm serving this guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
But just that, I have everything I need to wage a war on the perfection of the world, just like he planned.
Mm-hmm.
I just like, man, Agus may spend the rest of his days in a prison cell maybe, but boy, did he screw everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It was
well,
he saved. I love the ending of.
He saved them and screwed them all at the same time.
Oh yeah.
So like I said, to me, this last issue, this ending, was the saving grace of everything else I'd read before. So it really takes all my complaints about the various things that we've talked about, and puts them a little bit into a corner, because of how good the ending really was.
Yeah. My other question is how can they fight these final fights? Is that because they're close to the device and so it doesn't? Does it say in here? Because if they're all non-violent now in this perfect world, how are they having this final battle?
What do you mean? What final battle?
Well, just this whole battle at Oculus's base, where everybody's basically, trying to beat the hell or kill each other.
Oh, you mean between Saber and the rest of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It says on. Wow, did I just make that up? I swear to God, it said something in here somewhere about that. And now I can't find it either. Yep, I can't find it. But I thought that it did say something about it. Oh yeah, right here. I got it. Duh. It's on the first page of that last issue, the third panel.
Okay.
So it's got Zenith and Saber camo talking, and she says it works like an AM radio antenna. The closer you are to it, the less it works. This entire
Okay.
area, it's pretty much exactly like the world it used to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought there was something. I just wasn't able to find it. So
Man.
yeah. Yeah. So I'm assuming in your trade it shows the covers of each of these issues,
Yes. It
which
shows a cover. I don't know if there were any variant covers.
yeah, I don't. I kind
Yes.
of like some of the covers, and some of the covers I didn't like. I like the first one. The second one's fine too. The two colored issue, the ones that have more color on them,
Mm-hmm.
more of a scene, issue 3 and issue 4. I love issue 5, the cover of issue 5, where it's a close up of Oculus's mask, and you can see all of the heroes reflected in it, but all their faces are skulls.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that cover. I really like the art in this book. I like the colorations. I mean, like I say, we haven't talked a whole lot about it. I thought it, portrays all the emotions, people's faces and whatnot. Everybody's faces don't look the same. All the stuff that tends to be issues sometimes. I enjoyed that. I mean, the art was not a detraction at all. I quite enjoyed it actually, as far as the art goes.
Mm-hmm. For the most part, I did too.
Yeah.
I thought some of because I believe that, so Ryan Bodenheim is the artist, so I assume he's inking himself here. Sometimes I think his inks are a little much, a little too thick in parts. But it's, that's a minor quibble, really. I think his art is, pretty well clean for the most part. The only real issue I have with the art is that sometimes the characters' faces look a little screwy to me, the same characters. You look at some of the faces of Zenith throughout the issues, they look a little weird. But it's, again, it's not that big of a deal.
I guess I didn't notice that. I thought it worked pretty well.
Well, what's funny is I noticed it more with her than anybody else, so I'm not sure what's going on with that.
I mean, his faces at a distance look a little simple, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But up close, I thought up close when we're actually getting a face shot, a headshot of somebody, mm-hmm. I thought that emotions were portrayed really well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, any headshot that I'm assuming the writer requested, you can, without words, you can tell kind of, what they're thinking and where the character's at as far as the mindset goes.
Yeah, you're right. He did a really good job at depicting emotion, that's for sure, in the faces. The one thing I will point out, I hate to sound all negative about the art because it's really quite good, but there are times where he uses the same exact pose in separate panels, where you get a lot of two shots of characters' faces, and it's the same exact art. It's just perhaps colored a little differently, or there's something else going on in the panel, but it's the same headshot. And where that works effectively in small doses, I think the artist does it too much throughout the entire series. So that's just a minor thing. It just stuck out to me as all. But really, I have to give a lot of credit to the color artist, because where sometimes it's real minimal in panels, like some of the back, people are in rooms and suddenly the backgrounds disappear. But it conveys a certain motion. Like I'm looking at a page, I think it's from issue 2, yes, where Oculus is sitting on his bed in his cell, and you see him on a bed. There's a sink and a toilet, and everything else is white. And that kind of speaks to me, like a sense of isolation.
Right.
Which works. It's not realistic by any means, but it works. And there's another scene here I'm looking at with Jarhead, where he's being told basically he's obsolete, right? And there's obviously he's standing there in the room with his general, and there's stuff on the wall, but the close-up shot of him, the rest of the panel is just this really muted kind of tannish color. And that's it. But again, that works for the emotional kick that you're supposed to get there for this character. So I'm okay with it. And like anyway, we mentioned those one scene, like the explosion scene there with the
Right.
color, and yeah, I, the color artist did a really good job on this. I think it raised the art um, in general just a little bit more.
Definitely.
So yeah. So overall, Travis, should people pick up the trade if they have not read this book?
I think so. I think the ending of it. I think the ending of it has a good enough payoff to make it worth the read.
Mm-hmm.
How I managed to soldier through the singles, I'm not sure. Mostly on Lark, got the first issue because I didn't know exactly what it was, and then it happened to be, sitting next to other stuff that I was interested in picking up at the time, and so I had the extra bucks in my pocket, to buy it as far as singles go.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is. I don't know what the price tag on the trade is, but I'm sure that you could probably find it someplace online for a reasonable price that I would think it makes it worth the money. I think it makes it worth the money, like I said, just because of the you know the questions that it has in it. Yeah, they aren't 100% answered, but the final play out that the bad guy has at the very end of it, and how it's all sets up at the very end, I think made it worth it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you
Yeah,
think?
I would agree with everything you just said. So I obviously had some issues with specific things throughout the
Right.
series, but again, at the risk of repeating myself, that final issue really paid off for the previous four issues.
Mm-hmm.
And not that it negates the problems I have with it, but it does come across as a really interesting take on uh, this kind of superhero story. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think people should read it. And since you mentioned it, the trade is only $14.99, and yeah, you can get it for cheaper at places like In Stock Trades or other online places.
Right.
So yeah, overall, I think it's a pretty good book. I'm glad I was able to read it and talk about it with you, Travis, today.
Yep.
All right. Anything else that we want to talk about, Halcyon?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, that will be it then. We will. I think, Travis, next time we get together, we should talk yet again. But I want to get your thoughts on the New 52 now that we are 3 months in. So
Right.
we talked about the initial, the first issues for several weeks there, and I wanted to get away from DC for a while. That's why we wanted to talk about Halcyon today.
Sure.
But I want to get back together with you sometime in the near future to talk about what we think about the New 52 3 months into it.
Sounds good.
So I think that'll be the next issue or the next podcast, and then we'll see. We might do a year-end wrap-up. I've never done anything like that, so that should be interesting, if not fun.
Sure.
So that's what's coming up for the end of 2011 for the Long Box Review podcast. Let's see, and then of course, we'll be doing some other stuff next year, I hope.
Yep.
All right. Please, folks, let us know what you think. How did you feel about Halcyon if you've read it? Did you like what we had to say about it? Did you disagree with us? We'd like to hear from you. Please email longboxreview@gmail.com. You can also leave some comments at the blog, and even over Twitter, or even if you like Facebook as well. So with that, Travis, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric. Have a good one.
You too, and everyone else, thanks for listening.